Hey, this is David Hayter. You may know me as the screenwriter of films like X-Men, X-Men 2, and Watchmen, but you probably know me best as the voice of Solid Snake from Metal Gear Solid. And you're listening to Hawaii's #1 podcast, the Kasanova Podcast. Kept you waiting, huh?
All right, and welcome everyone to another episode of Hawaii's #1 podcast, the Kasanova Podcast. I'm your host, Mikhail Kasanova, and today I have the true honor and privilege of interviewing the one, the only Joe of GameSack. Joe, how you doing today?
Awesome. Great to be here, man.
Awesome. It's an honor to have you on. Huge fan of the channel and the work you guys have done over the years, and you know, I'm nervous. I'm actually nervous. Well, I'm always nervous. Every interview I do, I'm always nervous, but I'm incredibly nervous now because like the content you guys have done over the last 8, 9, 10 years has really like influenced me to
coming up on 10 years in a couple of months.
It's a wild journey. You know, I'm going to shut up at this point. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Like, I don't want to mess it up. I'm so nervous.
All right. Well, I am Joe from GameSack. GameSack is a channel on YouTube. I created it with my friend Dave back in April of 2011. I think our first episode was released in like early March. I have to go back and check, but sometime around then. And we've just been covering retro video games since then, mostly retro video games. We do occasionally talk about new games because we still both like to play, you know, current video games, but we've been mostly focused on the retro stuff. Dave is no longer part of the show. Nothing, you know, no bad blood or anything. He just has family to take care of, and, you know, creating GameSack took a little bit more time than he was comfortable with, which I can understand. I have none of that going on, so I'm continuing the show on my own, and sometimes Dave will drop by when he gets a little bit of time. And it's been, like you said, a wild ride. It's been pretty crazy.
Like when you think back on it, like you look back, let's step in the DeLorean and go back 10 years ago. Would you have ever thought that the channel and the brand would have taken off to the heights that it has?
Honestly, no. I mean, I would never even have thought that I would still be doing it in 10 years. I just, when we first started, I was like, okay, we'll just see how it goes. And that's as far as my thought process went. I didn't even, I mean, there was, I guess, a way to monetize videos back then, but that wasn't even on my mind yet. I didn't even think it would be, you know, possible to do such a thing with GameSack until like at least a year later. And so it's definitely grown a lot bigger than I thought it would have.
Yeah, it's just interesting, like looking at how the landscape of YouTube has grown from, you know, the site where basically it was built by, you know, independent creators such as yourself, to now it's like everyone's trying to get on YouTube now. All the celebrities, you got all the multimedia companies, they're all hopping on. Like YouTube is like in your, okay, so this is a 2-part question, but in your opinion, has the landscape of YouTube, has it changed a lot for the better or the worse with all these brands and celebrities hopping on the platform?
Right. That's a question that can be answered in both ways. Yes, it has changed for the better, and yes, it has changed for the worse. For the worst, you know, it's harder for people to get on and build an audience.
Yeah,
I think because, you know, everyone's trying these days, so it's harder for people to get seen at the start. And for the better, I think it has. You've got better quality video, better quality audio than was even dreamed upon, like back in YouTube's early days. And I remember just hating the YouTube video quality, you know, the first few years it existed. And it's just so much better now. But it's also, you know, at least from my point of view, it's a little bit better because I have a following, I guess you could say, and it's easier, I think, to make a living once you have that many followers. I don't want to sound like, you know, I don't want to toot my own horn or anything, but
Go ahead, toot the horn. Go ahead.
It's just like, you know, I'm glad I came into YouTube when I did, because I think if I came in later, I wouldn't have been able to build the same amount of following, is basically what I'm trying to get at, I think. Yeah. So.
No, I can definitely see that. It's because I know, like, especially out here in Hawaii, there's a lot of people that within, you know, clearly the last year, or you know, we were to add even the year prior, 2019, to that. A lot of people out here were trying to jump into YouTube, and they're struggling with it. They're like, oh, I don't know how to get views. I don't know how to, you know, catch on with using social media. And I'm like, it was a lot. Like when I started YouTube back in, I want to say 2015, 2016. It was easier then. Like,
yeah,
a lot easier then. The algorithm didn't feel like it was throttling you then, but a lot of people now that I know, they're uploading videos and they're like, I'm getting no traction. And I'm like, yeah, it's significantly harder now.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways it's changed for the worse, you know, the algorithm being one of them. But I think that unfortunately is kind of a necessary evil.
Yeah.
Because, you know, not all of your subscribers will get notified when you upload something, but at the same time, everyone's subscribed to like 40 or 50 or more different channels, who knows how many. And so YouTube is just trying to do its best to make things as uncluttered. Unfortunately, it has a side effect of not always seeing the channels you want, which is why they have that bell, which supposedly doesn't always work.
Yeah, like it's kind of a hit or miss, but you know, hopefully more hits than misses.
Right.
But definitely, man, let's talk, you know, your journey, like your journey with gaming and whatnot. I know you guys have spoken about it many times on GameSack, but you know, from your perspective, how, like, what was it like growing up as a gamer?
Well, my first exposure to games, of course, was in the arcade, because that's, you know, how old I am. And so I'd play games like Miss Pac-Man, Kangaroo, and Hubert. Those were some of my favorites. And my family didn't own an Atari, but we knew someone who did. And so I'd play it occasionally there. But I didn't really, you know, get the full gaming bug until the 8-bit systems came out. And at the time, I was visiting arcades still, and I really liked the Sega games like Outrun, Space Harrier, or whatever. And that's why I chose that. I felt like the Sega Master System would be the console for me. So I was just really jonesing for that, and I saved up all my Christmas money. And eventually, once they got them restocked in the stores, I went and bought that. And basically, I've just been playing video games ever since. It's been crazy. I mean, video games really, I mean, they were popular during the Atari days, but they became really popular during the Nintendo days. And ever since then, gaming has not gone away at all. It's just gotten bigger and bigger. It's crazy. It's amazing to see what's happened in this industry.
It really is, like going from watching, you know, pixels on screen to being fully lifelike 3D models that sometimes, you know, it's hard to tell if is it real, is it CG? You know, it's come a long way. You know, I grew up during the 80s, so like being able to grow up with the, you know, Sega Master System, the original NES, and the Turbo Graphics. Like for me growing up, seeing that now to where it is from then to now is just, it's truly astounding. And it's something when I talk to a lot of the younger generation that are gamers now, and like their first exposure with gaming is like the 360 or the PlayStation 2 or the GameCube, and I'm like, wow, to look at the amount of generations that have come and gone, like even before that, it's just like, wow, that's your starting point. Okay.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing to think about. And I found that a lot of people who, even though their exposure was that generation or even later, a
Hmm.
lot of them will still like the retro games, like the 8 and the 16-bit games.
Yeah.
Not so much the Atari stuff. That hasn't aged as well, but I think
Yeah.
it just goes to show how well older games have aged. And
Yeah.
that it just shows you how good game design became during that era, I think.
Yeah, and it's like you look at a lot. There were like it's funny how some people say that like games nowadays they're rushed in the way the games back then weren't. But I was like, no, there's a lot of games back then that were rushed that didn't hold up very well. So
Well, it's easier to cherry pick when you're looking back on something.
yeah,
So it's like, people who always say like, oh, the old Saturday Night Live is better than the new. It's like, no, you're just cherry picking. It's always sucked. But they always have like, good stuff here and there. So,
yeah. Yeah, definitely. So okay, so Sega, we went to Sega Master System, going to the Sega Genesis. Like, at what point do you feel like gaming started to become more mainstream? Like, I guess
definitely the PlayStation era. Like once they came out with like games on disc and they really started getting into the stories in games. I'm not huge into stories in games. I don't mind them, but that's not like the reason I buy games. But once they started doing that, they got the Metal Gear Solid type of games and the Final Fantasy VII, stuff like that. People just started going crazy. And the PlayStation, I think, was the biggest selling console ever at that point. Then, of course, the PlayStation 2 comes along, and it's still the biggest selling console ever with just an insane amount of games. So it started becoming mainstream in the PlayStation era, I think, like really mainstream. And then it just became absolutely mainstream in the PS2 era, I think, surpassing the movie industry.
Yeah. And it's interesting, like a lot of games like you mentioned, very narrative driven games. A lot of people seem to have this assumption that the strong narrative games started with the PlayStation 1, when in reality, I mean, Sega had been doing it as well as Nintendo. I mean, you had the Fantasy Star series, Shining Force, you had the Final Fantasy, and even Ys had been doing it for a while. But
it's like I don't think they were ever marketed very well because there was like this belief that people in the West didn't want to play RPGs. They wanted only action games. So companies wouldn't take a chance or they wouldn't spend much in marketing them. And then Final Fantasy VII comes along and they market the hell out of that. And it just takes off like crazy.
Yeah. And then there's also too, wasn't it, with Japan with the games that were coming out here back in the days for like Sega, was it Super Nintendo, original Nintendo and Sega Genesis, they would artificially harden them because of rental, like Blockbuster and whatnot.
And like you'd think they'd be all over these RPGs because of that reason, because most RPGs you're not going to be renting it for a couple of nights. So I would have think they would have had more games like that where you'd want to buy them to take your time and go through them. But no, I guess not. I mean, they still released them, but they just didn't market them very well, I don't think.
Yeah. It's interesting when I go back and play the older titles back then, and I'm like, damn, this game is hard. How did I go? Like, it's funny, like the perspective of being an adult playing these games from back then to being a kid playing it at the time. And like, I was, I forgot who I was talking to the other day. I was doing a podcast and I was telling them, like, back then, like, at least for me and most folks I knew, you only got a game on your birthday or Christmas, or if you saved up money to buy something.
Right.
And so, like, if you got something and it sucked, it didn't matter. You're going to play it because that's all you had.
I remember, like, when Dynamite Headdy came out on the Genesis.
Oh,
that thing is incredibly difficult. And, like, I had a chance to play the Japanese version, which I'd never even thought of doing. But it's on the Genesis Mini, I believe, and you can switch it to the Japanese mode. And it's like, wow, this game is like a lot better. I mean, I feel it's a lot better in the Japanese version because the gameplay is more balanced.
Yeah.
But I was still able to get pretty far in the US version. It's just like, it's a lot more frustrating.
Yeah. I know definitely going back to play the original Castlevania on the NES, for me, I have no idea how I beat that as a kid. Like I was struggling playing on the Castlevania collection recently. I was like, man, yeah, getting to stage 6, yeah, it's pretty nuts.
Yeah, it is. But I think it's like you said before, that's the only game you have, so you play it over and over and over. And
Yeah.
So and then you go back to it like 20 or 30 years later, and you're just, you haven't played it for a while, so yeah, you're not as good.
Definitely. So with the advent of gaming, becoming more mainstream, have you seen, well, clearly, probably you have, this is a dumb question, let me rephrase that. So with gaming going mainstream, the types of gamers have definitely changed. What has been your opinion on modern gamers, or the more recent gamers that have come around within the last 10, 15 or so years, compared to like more so the era like you and I grew up in?
Well, I think the era that you and I grew up in was more or less a boys only club. I mean, girls did play games, but you just didn't hear about it as much. I mean, there was no internet, so you didn't really know. But it felt like kind of a boys only club. These days, it's definitely not that. And not only that, but back then it was mostly like, teenagers or younger playing games, teenagers at the oldest. And teenagers weren't really playing many video games until like the Genesis came out, and Sega tried to appeal to an older audience. And gamers from the previous generation were growing up. But now, obviously players of every age, even people older than us, are playing games. And personally, I think that's great. So it's pretty impressive. I mean, I'm just glad to see the industry grow to expand its audience, which is really nice.
Yeah, it's like literally anyone can pick up and play a game. And I really feel like the Wii also helped that too.
Oh yeah, big time.
Oh man, I know a lot of folks I know out here, like a lot of my friends, even their grandparents, you go to their places, you still see the Wii with like the only game they have is like Wii Sports.
Yeah, of course. That's all they need. They just need Wii bowling. That's all.
Right.
I mean, I can understand it's a good game, so as long as it works, if they're having fun with that, no big deal.
Yeah. With the we've seen a lot of retro games come back, in the sense of like like the Astro City Mini, you've got the was it the Neo Geo Mini, you've got the arcade 1-up machines have been blowing up in popularity. Is it shocking to see how that has resurged after so many years?
Probably not shocking. More, I'm gonna like bring that down a little bit and say just surprising. Not like, oh my goodness, but it's like a pleasant surprise, because it just makes me happy that people are still able to appreciate these old games and have new avenues to play them, because not everyone has like CRTs laying around and the ability to hook up their old consoles and cartridges and whatnot, and they don't necessarily want to get back into it, but they still want to play those old games that they played before, or maybe they just want to experience it for the first time. So I think that's great. I also am hoping, and I think it's true, that it helps renew interest in retro. Like maybe someone who wasn't interested in those games before may have some growing interest now, having played those games. Like I said, like there are some kids who their first experience was a 360 or whatever, and they still like those old games. Once they play them, they think they're cool to mess around with and get into.
And I definitely think it helps in the sense of a digital preservation, or a preservation in general, for these older titles, because there's so many classics that just release physically only, and then there's no other way you can play it. I mean, of course there's emulation, and then there's the gray area around that, but a lot of stuff, there's almost no way to play it legally anymore. And it's kind of alarming. I know I've talked to some folks at Capcom recently about how they're re-releasing a lot of stuff, and what are their thoughts on classic IPs that they have that they haven't brought back, and they're like, we'd love to, but there's a lot of gray tape. There's licensing and the legal, like was it Alien versus Predator? They're like, yeah, we'd love to more readily get available, but
yeah, Capcom and especially Konami, in the arcades anyway, they just loved making video games based on licensed property, and that's, well, like they said, a lot of gray tapes. Like, how do you do that? Like Scott Pilgrim recently just came back. And that's been that got released in 2013 originally, somewhere around there. That probably wouldn't have went away if it wasn't for the license. Outrun comes and goes because of the Ferrari license. And so it's really kind of frustrating that, games based on licenses have this issue. And honestly, I don't really see many games, besides sports games anymore, being based on licenses. I mean, I guess there would be racing games. I don't know if you call those sports games or not, but you don't really see like a Tommy Lasorda baseball or an Aliens versus Predator game. Well, I guess you do. I mean, I guess they do happen. I may just be full of shit. I really don't know, but it seems like it's less.
No, I mean, it was definitely good to play. I know Koch Media and Capcom, they sent me out about a year and a half ago the Capcom Home Arcade, and I know that got a lot of flack for the emulation and the selection of games, but like for me, it was good to be able to play that, play Alien versus Predator again, because I haven't. How long has it been? 20 something years since I last touched it. So, I like the fact that there are ways like such as that you can play a lot of these retro titles. I just wish it was more easily accessible.
Right.
But I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the solution would be for stuff like that.
But one thing
I would love to play Cadillacs versus Dinosaurs again.
Yeah. One thing I'm kind of a stickler on is like if they're gonna do these compilations or whatever, I really wish they would go the extra mile and make sure the emulation is as good as they can get it, because I think it would be best if people will experience the game the way it was meant to be experienced, more or less, just in terms of graphics and audio and gameplay, of course. But like when they started coming out with like these emulated games, like on the Xbox 360, I remember Digital Eclipse, not in their best years, they're a lot better now, but they were doing the audio was just awful. Like in the Castlevania games and the Golden Axe arcade games, it's just like horrible audio. I just and a lot of Genesis emulators originally a long time ago had really bad audio, and people would just think the Genesis audio is just that bad. I mean, they may still not like it even when it sounds really good, but that gave it even a worse reputation in my opinion. And so, good emulation is important to me.
It is like you give the people the true accurate representation of what it really was, and that is important. I remember for myself personally, I tried the at games.
Oh God. That probably didn't do anything to help the Genesis's reputation either, because they came out with so many of those, and they were cheap, really cheap. So people would buy them, and they just think, "Oh man, the Genesis looks and sounds like ass." And what other context do they have? So
and then Sega came out with their own version of it, and it's like, you guys should have done that before.
Right. Well, that's funny, because originally when they were coming out with the Genesis Mini or Mega Drive Mini or whatever they were calling it, At Games was slated to be the people who were going to make it.
Yeah.
And people were like, no, and they got dropped really fast.
Oh man. Yeah, it's that's the other thing too, is like I was surprised when the mini consoles were coming out, how quickly they sell out. Like when I got my Sega Genesis Mini, and I got the Super Nintendo and the NES Mini and the Neo Geo Mini, I had to literally back, how we used to do back in the day, like camp out to get it. And I was shocked to see how many people were there. I was like,
Yeah.
what? This
I'm curious how many of those they make. I mean, it is hard, especially the Nintendo stuff,
Yeah.
because it seems like I don't know if it's artificial scarcity on their part, because it seems like anytime Nintendo comes out with something, it's really hard to get a hold of,
Yeah.
suspiciously.
Right.
So I know the PlayStation Mini wasn't that hard to get a hold of because it had kind of a bad reputation at the start. I guess you can, jailbreak it or do something to it now where it's all okay and even actually kind of cool. But I know in the beginning they were discounted heavily.
I was, yeah, you see that. Okay, so that one. Okay, what are your thoughts on that PlayStation Mini?
The PlayStation, yeah, whatever it was called. Yeah, I didn't like those issues, like them having all those PAL games for whatever reason and running slower. That just baffled me. Everyone's gonna say, hey, it doesn't include this game or that game. There's no way they could have included a perfect list of games. Granted, they could have definitely included a better list of games. No one's saying that that's the best out there, but I think if you're going to get one, you can hack it and then you can put whatever you want on there. And I think that's probably pretty good to go. I think the actual form factor of the thing is pretty awesome. It's just so cool looking.
Mm-hmm.
And like even the USB, you plug in the USB controllers and you can't even tell it's a USB controller. It looks like a little PlayStation controllers plugged in.
Yeah. I was like, when I saw the game list for it, I was like, okay, Final Fantasy VII, that makes sense. Metal Gear, that makes sense. But if you're going to put that on there, why are you not having the analog?
Right. Yeah, I forgot about that. They really should have had that.
But some of the other titles, like the original Persona and Toshinden, I was like, really?
Toshinden. I guess it has us fans. I don't know how many, but
Does it?
I think it does. Maybe it's just because of the music. I don't know.
Yeah, that was wild. Like I thought, Sega, Nintendo did way better with theirs. I mean, even SNK.
Oh, yeah.
Like with I know a lot of people have complained, like with the SNK, the Neo Geo Mini, that it's too many fighting games. But I'm like, if you grew up in the 90s or you were around in the 90s, that's kind of what SNK was known for.
Yeah, I mean, that's the Neo Geo for you.
Yeah.
I thought the little screen on that thing was actually not too bad. I think the HDMI output could have been a little crisper.
Yeah.
But I did like what they did with the controllers that you can plug into them, because the original Neo Geo CD controllers, which it's modeled after, had the button arrangement so that A was like below B and B was right above A, kind of to the right. And so like games like Magician Lord or games where you had an action and a jump button, it didn't feel right. Not like holding a Super Nintendo controller where you're jumping with B and doing your action move with Y, I think it is. So they switched it around so it was more like a Super Nintendo controller, and I definitely approved of that.
I know there's controversy with it for not having the micro switches within it.
Yeah, I honestly, I mean, that didn't bother me as much as some people. It was still a good pad. So in fact, I kind of like it better without the micro switches, because I have the Rio pad and it breaks down all the time.
Yeah.
There's something in there that it sheds and you got to clean it out.
Yeah. And definitely, I think for a lot of the fighting games that it has, like SNK games are notorious for crazy, variations of inputs to do moves. So having just the analog, actually, in many ways, for me, it makes sense. So, I know. So with the Sega Astro City Mini that recently came out too, is that coming stateside, or is that just?
I don't think so. I mean, if it does, I'll be surprised. Like I said in my video about it, never say never, but I would be surprised if it did, which is why I picked it up, because that's the Astro City that cabinet is kind of a very Japanese thing. I mean, they could still bring it out over here. I think it would find its fans regardless, but I would be surprised. But it's really good. I really like it, and it's not perfect, but I think it was worth the money for me.
Yeah, like I know some of the emulation on it was like for a few games was kind of spotty. One of my friends had said, but especially like with Virtua Fighter.
Yeah, Virtua Fighter. There's a little bit of slowdown during the replays and whatnot. But it doesn't happen if you're playing it on the Astro City screen itself. So, and then there's a few, the normal sound emulation differences and stuff like that, which they never get right.
Okay. Speaking of which, when it comes to for GameSack, the style that you guys have, or it's at this point but both of you previously, like, how did you guys come up with that style? Because I've seen other channels after, you and Dan, that are, Sega versus Nintendo, but, how did you guys come up with that style?
The Sega versus Nintendo style?
Yeah.
Well, basically, I've always been, at least in high school when we were going to high school together, I've been more of a Sega fan, and Dave was more of a Nintendo guy, though we both still liked the other systems. I would always buy every system I could as soon as I could. Like, well, I didn't get an NES until maybe 15 years ago, but that's another story. But starting with the Super Nintendo, I bought it as soon as I could with some Christmas money and some job money, and I got that a few months after launch. And then just after that, I would buy every system I could except for the likes of the CDI as soon as they came out. And that includes like
CDI.
I bought this 3DO when it first came out. But I would buy everything but the CDI, and I don't think the Amiga CD32 was sold in my particular area, so I had no interest in it anyway. And the only other system that was a true console that I didn't buy was the Atari Jaguar. I was just like, no, I just can't. So, but I've just always kind of had, kind of a love for Sega because they've always been kind of the underdog, and it's fun to battle. It gives us something to do during the episode, tease each other for, liking a certain Nintendo or Sega game, and just it made for some funny moments. And we would, come up with things that, we're making fun of each other, but that, we don't really feel, but we're just doing it just to be an ass to each other. So your game sucks just because it's on Nintendo. No matter how good it is, it doesn't matter because it sucks because it's on Nintendo. Just that kind of logic where you change your way of thinking just to make sure the other guy's console sucks. No matter what, it has to suck because you don't own it. You own something else. So my console is better than your console. So.
Well, people don't realize. Well, I think more modern gamers don't understand the idea of the console wars. Like, I know people now are like, "Oh, Xbox versus PlayStation," and to me, what modern quote unquote console wars is kind of silly. But I remember how it was back in the day. It really was Sega versus Nintendo.
Yeah, well, and back then they had a lot of exclusives. These days, not really. So it's kind of weird to fight about consoles these days.
It really, yeah, and it's like I see the argument a lot of people have for like Xbox. They're like, "Oh, Xbox doesn't have any games," and then I'm like, okay, so where is this argument going? And it's about exclusives. And then when they talk about Sony exclusives, I'm like, okay, well, if you were to really name Sony made exclusives, they're not a whole lot, if you were to compare it more so to Nintendo. But okay, so Sony's got their exclusives, and then they have more Japanese oriented games like RPGs and fighting games. Yeah, right. It makes sense because it's a Japanese console, whereas primarily with Xbox gamers, they don't really play fighting games or RPGs. But it's just the current console war thing is just, it's silly to me. There's very little differences between the consoles at this point.
You know, it's really so far. This is totally stupid too. My favorite thing about this current console generation is the backwards compatibility. How sad is that? I mean, I love it, but it's like when the backwards compatibility outweighs the new games that are out,
Right?
that's a little sad. But still, I love it. So, I like how like some of the older games, you know, they get beefed up when you play them on the newer console. I think that's cool. It makes me want to try them all again and stuff.
Because I was thinking, like, with if we were to take away the backwards compatibility of the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X, I think the Xbox Series X would probably have one game still, and the PlayStation 5 would have what, one, I think.
2 or 1. Yeah, I don't know. No, it depends on if you count digital games, because there's, for the PlayStation 5, there would be the Astro's Playground and Demon's Souls. Demon's Souls is a remake, so can you count that since it's on the PlayStation 3? And then, I mean, I guess you could, because it's built from the ground up. And then Xbox would have what, the Falconeer or whatever it's called.
Falconeer, yeah.
But it's I still need to get that. But it's also on PC. So
yeah. It's I worked with Wire Productions with promoting and streaming the Falconeer. It's fun. Just, you know, streaming that for 5 hours that was a little daunting, but
yeah, it kind of looks like one of my old favorite Xbox games, Crimson Skies. You know, just the way it plays, and so that's kind of what appeals to me.
Yeah, it's definitely got that appeal to it. It is fun, the customization you can do with the different Falcons that you get. It's a fun game that I wish kind of got more exposure than what it did.
Yeah, but it's not a system seller. So.
Yeah, it's not. But yeah, like with you know, going back to how it was back in the day, Sega and Nintendo, like back then, you look at all the consoles that dropped between, you know, when the Super Nintendo, the Sega Genesis, you had all the, you know, the Amiga, the 3DO, you had the Jaguar, you had the CDI. I actually have a story. I remember when my mom was like, "Oh," she came home one day and she's like, "Hey kids, I got you guys a new console," and she brought home the CDI, and we were like, "What is this? Like, what is this?" And she's like, "Oh, it's a new game console. This is a Nintendo." We're like, "That's not a no."
Oh man.
Oh, but is it surprising to see how many companies are not making consoles now compared to back then? I know.
Right. Because back then, you know, Sony jumped into the game. It was just Sega and Nintendo for a little bit.
Yeah.
Then Sony jumped into the game. Atari jumped back in. Panasonic and Gold Star, now known as LG, jumped in. Philips with the CDI, and did Magnavox have their own CDI?
I think they did, yeah.
Like just crazy. I mean, it's like everyone was making their own version of this or that hardware. So yeah, now it's just down to the big three: Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo.
And then I guess you can include Atari somewhat.
Wait, what? Oh, you mean for that
thing? Yeah,
that thing. Then I guess we got to include Intellivision with their Amico,
right?
So, but neither of those are out. Is the Atari thing out yet?
I think it just shipped. A few people may have gotten it. That thing was. I think the last time I really heard people talking about that was like 2 or 3 years ago, and I saw a few people. I think ETA Prime and a couple other YouTubers. I think Mad Little Pixel got his, and I was like, "Oh, that thing it actually lives."
I guess it's a digital only console because there was no place to insert any kind of games.
Yeah,
and then I don't know. You could count the little guys like the people who make the Evercade too, I suppose.
Yeah. Was it the KFC console? They're supposed to be
Yeah, I still don't know what that is.
What?
I've heard of it, but it's like, what?
It's like keep your chicken warm while you game, and I'm like, okay, that doesn't even seem possible. Like,
got to keep your score so high, otherwise it just, your chicken starts cooling off. Got to get to a certain level, otherwise it doesn't unlock and you can't eat your chicken.
You know what? If they marketed it that way, I think that would actually work.
Might. Buy the KFC console. Chicken's already inside. You got to play to unlock.
Say, where can you buy it? Go to your local KFC.
Yep.
Oh man. What are your thoughts on this? I guess the future of gaming. At some point, it's going to go all digital. But do you feel we're close to that? I know companies are trying very hard to push, like Microsoft and Sony are trying to push that, their digital consoles. But
yeah, I mean, every time a new console comes out, I think, okay, the next console will be the one that goes digital only. I thought that when the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 started, selling full games digitally online. It's like, okay, maybe the PS4 and whatever they call the next Xbox will do that. And they tried that with the next Xbox and they got a lot of backlash. And so they went back to physical media. And then or they did something really weird. I can't remember what it was, but they tried something similar to that. And then I figured, okay, well, the next Xbox after that and the PS5 will be all digital, but nope. But they have the digital only versions of the consoles. So who knows? We'll see what the PS6 and the Xbox Series, whatever.
Okay, we got to talk about that. Xbox's naming conventions. What are your thoughts?
Xbox, okay, they call it the Xbox, whatever. Cool. I mean, It doesn't bother me. Then, of course, the next thing they call their system is Xbox 360. Why did they call it the 360, not the Xbox 2? Because the PlayStation 3 came out, and if they're going to come out with the Xbox 2, people will look at that. People are dumb. They will look at that and say, the Xbox 2 is less powerful than the PS3 because the number is lower. So they called it the Xbox 360. And then people just, as its life went on, people kept calling it, hey, it's the 360. Get that game for the 360. I'm going to play me some 360. So that was the logic in calling the next console the Xbox One, because they figured, people would just call it the One, and that's cool. No, they did not do that. They called it Xbox. And then that lived its life, and they finally came out with the DLC for it, or whatever you want to call it, the expansion pack called the Xbox One X, and it was slightly more powerful. So it's like, yeah, okay, whatever. I can deal with that. No big deal. Then they come out with the Xbox Series X, and I'm like, wait, no, that is way too close to Xbox One X. And like I said, people are stupid. Microsoft should know this because they called their 360. They called it the 360. Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
They shouldn't call it the Series X. They should call it something that's completely different than the One X or the Series S or whatever it was called. Just to differentiate it. I mean, Nintendo learned that right away when they brought out the Wii U, because they were like, is that another, Wii console? Or, it was very confusing for a lot of people. So it's best not to take that chance. Some gamers are like, well, people who know will definitely know the difference between the Series X and the One X. Don't you? It's like, yes, I do. And so do you. But everyone's not as into this stuff as we are when they're going to the store to buy these things.
Yeah.
So I think the naming should be different.
It really should be. And I think whoever was at Microsoft doing like the, whoever had the inventory, they're like, okay, we need to quickly discontinue the Xbox One X.
Right.
Because of the whole, what was it? Was it Amazon, or people were trying, they were buying the One X thinking they got the Series X.
Yep. Yeah. Right when the Series X went on sale, they were buying a lot of One X, because you're just looking for that Xbox X. That's what your mind sees. So it's like, okay, that's what I need. Buy. So
Yeah, I saw a lot of people posting on like Twitter and Instagram. They're like, yeah, oh, even Facebook too. They're like, oh yeah, I got my Series X, and they're showing the receipt. And then people in the comments are like, wait, you got the One X? They're like, no, it's the Series X. You know, it's the Xbox with the X. So that's the one I got. I was like, yeah.
So they basically just changed their console name from One to Series. And, you know, I have both the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. And I tell you, when I first turned on that Series X, it felt exactly like the Xbox One. It's like, what's the difference? And they didn't go out of their way to make it feel like any different. So that's just kind of sad to me. It feels more like an, you know, if the Xbox One X was the Xbox One Pro, this would be the Xbox Pro. It's still like the same generation of console, I guess.
Yeah, because it's like the entire interface is the same. It feels the same. Like the only time you're gonna be, the only way you'll notice a difference is if you have a TV or a monitor that can output, you know, 4K 60 or 4K 120, which I don't think we really have any monitors yet. I know they announced some at CES, but with the HDMI 2.1, but
yeah, there's a few, not many.
Yeah, so it's like unless you've got the monitor or TV that can handle the bandwidth for a higher refresh rate and resolution, it doesn't really feel any different. I mean, it's quick resolution, which is cool, but you have no control over that. So
yeah. So I'm thinking like it's probably gonna. I mean, you can already see that the PlayStation 5 is more popular. It's not like I really am backing a winner or anything. It doesn't matter to me because I'm going to have them both anyway. But it just looks like the PlayStation once again is going to be the more popular console.
Yeah, I feel really bad for people who go with like PlayStation 5 digital or the Xbox Series X, Series S. See, there I'm going. I'm screwing up already. Series S, if they go with those, because the games. Okay, so my PlayStation 5, I've got a couple physical games and a couple digital games I got for review, and just having, I want to say, Spider-Man Miles Morales, Demon Souls, and Call of Duty Cold War. That's already almost my entire drive. Not to mention having Astro's Playroom.
Right.
So it's like I think it has M2 slot for expansion, but you can't use it yet.
Right. Like, what's up with that?
So yeah, if you get digital, people, just you're gonna have to work with very, very limited space, and updates these games don't help at all.
Yeah, it's like okay, I'll delete this one to make some space, and then you want to play it again, and it's like, great, well, I'll just let it download for a couple of hours because like, you know, over 100 gigabytes. I had to do that with like, was it Forza Horizon 4 or 3 or whatever the latest one is on Xbox Series X. It was like 120 gigabytes. No, it was the Master Chief Collection. That was like 120 gigabytes.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my goodness, that's like more than 2 Blu-rays. So I was like, wow. And it still wanted to install some stuff from the disc. Not everything, but just some stuff.
What are your thoughts on that? Like with how basically games these days are on disc, it's basically just DRM. It's a DRM protection.
Almost. It depends. Like, yeah, sometimes, you know, you'll buy a game and they'll have a day one update. Sometimes you can still play the game without that day one update. Like I just saw on Digital Foundry today where the Last Guardian on the PlayStation 4, if you have the physical disc and you put it in your PlayStation 5 and you do not let it update from the disc, it will run at 60 frames per second. If you do let it update, it won't. It'll only run at 30. So it's actually, you have to work with the first version of the game and just not let it update in order to play the best version of the game. So there, you can still get the full games on disc, and I kind of like what limited run games does. I mean, I I'm not a huge fan of how they used to do it, but they're a lot better now where they do pre-orders. But
Hmm.
they always make sure to have the entire game on the disc or the card
Yeah.
in case of the Switch, and usually with a lot of the DLC as well, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah. It's. I know modern gamers are probably, they don't have any complaints, well, or limited complaints, not no complaints, limited complaints about having to install games, from disc, or many now are just going digital because digital games are always on sale. Every time you turn around, PlayStation has a sale, Nintendo has a sale, so does Xbox. But for me, it's always been jarring because growing up 80s, 90s, just put the card in and boom, there you go. Or put the
Right.
CD in and boom, there you go. But now it's like, put it in, wait an hour.
Install, download the update. I know.
Right.
The games are almost too big. I mean, I hate to say that because I don't like to limit or want to sound like I want to limit creativity or anything, but it's like they're almost too big for their own good.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I like seeing what they're able to do with all that space. So it's kind of like you can't really win no matter what you really do. But there's also a lot of, indie games out there which are really small and they load fast. They're not going to need a whole lot of updates. And if they do, they're going to be like very tiny. So. Man,
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was about to tell you to go ahead, I think. So.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, do you feel like, do you feel like you're gravitating more towards like indie games or games where you can just pick up and play and just go from there? Because I feel like, being older, I do feel like it's an investment to play a lot of, I guess you can say, the mainstream popular games at this point, because you have to sit through an hour or more of tutorials. You got to learn all these mechanics. You got to memorize what does what, and then all the dialogue. I feel like, being older, having a family and whatnot, it's just like, just let me play the game.
Yeah, I definitely feel like that. It's crazy. Like, I was just saying, games are too big for their own good. I think a lot of games are too complicated for their own good. It's like, oh, you got to learn like what each and every button does, and they all do something different. You got to learn how to do this and that. It's like tutorials are like, I don't know, just let me learn as I play the game. I feel is the best way. I mean, it's kind of hard to design a game like that. I think a tutorial is kind of a cheap way out, just because, they just don't want to design the gameplay to where you have to do a certain function in order to do it. They just throw it at you all at once, and then you don't remember half of it. And another thing about, games these days is, you play and you get, so far, and this can even happen in retro games too. This isn't just modern games, but you get to a certain point and you take a break and you just don't come back for a day, a week, a month, a year, who knows? And then you find like, oh yeah, I want to finish that up again. And you don't remember how to play. You don't remember what buttons do what, especially with the modern games. And then with the retro games too, you don't remember what you were supposed to do, what you were currently, where you go into the next town to get certain item, what item was that? You don't remember. So it's just like, oh man, that's why I like games that are just easy to pick up and play when I can. I love like stupid racing games and stuff like that.
Switching gears, I want to ask you this, because this is a topic that my friend Adam Korlick and I, we were talking about this a lot, and it's when it comes to Sega. So Sega, on a public front, they seem to have this, yes, we had the Sega Genesis, we had the Sega Dreamcast, but like if you mention Sega Saturn or 32X or anything that's not the Genesis or the Dreamcast, Sega's like, what are you talking about? They're like MIB with that pen. You don't
Oh man, I mean, they should embrace it. I mean, especially the Saturn.
Yeah.
Like, I can understand them like being a little embarrassed about the 32X, but I don't think very many people still work at Sega who worked back when the 32X was, not any of the decision makers anyway. And but the Saturn, that was incredibly impressive in Japan. I mean, it outdid the PlayStation for a while, and and it had a ton of great games that never came out over here. Even over here, though, it's still a great system. Sure, the PlayStation just kicked its ass, but they should just embrace that. I think there's a lot of interest in the Saturn. If they were to come out with a Saturn Mini or whatever, it would sell. It would absolutely sell, just because people would be curious. I believe the Sega Saturn episode of GameSack is still the most popular one. And the 32X one is up there as well. Just not necessarily because people like it, but they're just like really curious to know more about it. It was an odd system that they didn't necessarily experience, so they want to know more about it. So I think they should not. I think they should just embrace it.
They really should, because like I still have my Saturn, and when I go back and play it, I'm like, it's a ton of great games, especially when the games you can import. Like, if you were into arcade games, I mean, the Saturn was what you wanted to play.
Definitely.
But that's that's the thing I find funny about Sega. They're like, what are you talking about? No, we only had the Genesis and the Dreamcast. Like, okay.
Where's the Master System? Don't forget that too.
It's like, what? We don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, they didn't make a Master System Mini. I almost think that they should. I never even thought about it until now. Sure, it wouldn't be anywhere near as popular as even the Genesis Mini, but there's a lot of games from Europe that they could put on there that didn't come out over here. And they could just, the games are so tiny, and they could just cram everything, almost everything, except for the licensed stuff. And I'd buy one. I mean, why not?
Well, I've got a couple more questions for you, completely being respectful of your time. One of the questions I have is, when it comes to collecting retro, how hard is it now compared to, say, like 10 years ago?
Oh, wow. 10 years ago, it seemed much easier, because Dave and I would go to thrift stores like every weekend or every other weekend, and we'd usually find something, like not necessarily like great or anything, but there would be times where we would find some really good stuff. And there'd be all these retro game shops around town too. I mean, there still are a few, but not as many. And their prices wouldn't be bad, but once word of that got around, everyone started doing it. So now I don't even really bother going to thrift stores anymore, because I'm sure there are people who go there every single day just to see what they have and buy it up and sell it on eBay. As far as collecting, if I absolutely need something, I'll just bite the bullet and buy it on eBay. I don't really have much of a choice. Or if I need a console, I'll go to my friend's store. He runs Game Force Boulder up in Boulder, and he usually has a bunch of consoles for sale, and I'll just buy one of those.
Okay.
Like I did for the Saturn when I got my mode. It's like, I'm not putting my mode in my original Saturn, and that's going to be unmolested. I'm just going to get a new Saturn and take out the optical drive and put that in there. So I did that with the Dreamcast too.
That's one thing I wish we still had out here in Hawaii, was like retro game stores. We used to have one for the longest. We used to have it was a Toys and Joys, which was the place you go for if you're looking for stuff for cosplaying, if you're looking for anime that wasn't out here, if you're looking for manga or just import games. That was the spot to go. And it's been, sadly, 10 years. And all we have out here is probably 3 GameStops left, because they keep closing down left and right. And we have 1 book off left. And I think just Best Buy. That's it. Yeah. And then trying to import anything, or not just import, trying to buy anything. I mean, you could even be stuff from Amazon. You can't get it sent here just because of the shipping regulations. Like when I pre-ordered the SNES Classic and the NES Classic, they couldn't ship here because of what they said, battery capacity, which is some type of shipping regulation issue out here.
That's weird.
So, yeah. Try building a computer out here trying to get parts. Good luck.
Wow.
Like PSU? No, you're not buying that for your computer. You want a graphic card? No, that's not. What are you going to make with that? No. Same thing even with cell phones. Like even trying to get cell phones, like unless you're going through a carrier, like it's almost impossible. It's sad. So
yeah,
thrift stores, I think we probably have savers. That's all we got.
Yeah.
So, even then, I think they caught on to like retro stuff because the last time I was in there, I saw a what did I see? I saw a Atari Jaguar and they marked it up to like $150. I'm like, who's paying that?
Yeah, not for an Atari Jaguar. Yeah, I know like Goodwill, they caught on, and when that stuff comes in, it just goes right onto their website where it's an auction, I guess.
Yeah, it's wild. But so other than that, I guess the last couple questions I have too would be about as far as content creating goes. Like, what are your thoughts? I guess in the sense now when it comes to trying to build or reach an audience, do you find that social media is imperative? And if so,
it definitely helps. Most of my views just come from the subscribers on YouTube or people, just looking up GameSack on YouTube. But it's helpful, like for what we mentioned before, like YouTube not always sending out notifications. So I'll send out a tweet and I'll post on the GameSack Facebook page that, hey, new episode just launched. Here's the link. Go watch. Please and thank you. And I think it helps. I get a lot of traffic from that, not thousands upon thousands or anything, but I think it helps. And if I guess you can have people know who you are on those platforms, it helps. Like when I first started GameSack, I didn't have any of that. I just had forums like the Sega 16 forum or the PC Engine FX forum, and I would post my episodes on there. Hey, check this out. And then someone said, hey, you should upload these to Screw Attack as well. And so I started doing that, and they picked one of our episodes, a TurboGrafx 16 episode, and featured it on their front page for like a day. And then that's when we started growing. So you can't really, there's no Screw Attack or things to feature you in that manner to my knowledge anymore. So yeah, it's tough. I think consistency is really the best rule. Is like I release a video every other week, and sometimes I release bonus episodes more than that, but consistency is good as long as people can count on you to release stuff. I think it'll help your channel grow.
Yeah. I've found that, like you said, like consistency is the best way. And as far as like social, like I agree with you, social media helps. It's interesting. Like when I upload videos, ones that, and I don't know if you've run into this yourself, but like I know for me, there are videos I put a lot of time and effort into, and they don't do well.
Right.
And the ones that are kind of, and I hate to call it that, but like a throwaway episode, like, okay, all right, I'll throw this out. Like for me, I did Mafia Trilogy when that came out last year. I covered it because I got the code for it, and I did the review, but it was not something I was incredibly passionate about. But that one blew up, and I'm like, what the hell? Like,
yep. It's like the more effort you put into a video, the inversely popular it will be.
Yeah.
So it always feels like that.
So, do you feel like YouTube as a career is viable for people these days?
It can be, but you have to be really careful. You have to make sure, like I said, consistency. If you're consistent, then perhaps you can rely on the income. If you're just throwing out videos here and there when they're done, I would. It would I would be very, very, very nervous about it because you don't really know unless you're like you just have a huge base and your videos, whenever you put them out, just do incredible views. Then you can probably get away with just doing it whenever. But like for me, I just have to have stuff in the bag and release them regular in order to have a sustainable income.
Yeah. Do you? Is it? Over the years, I know you've worked with various companies and such. Has it been surreal? Like being able to go from fan to being able to be like, it's essentially, business partners by covering their products or working with them. Like, has that, like, what is that experience like for you?
Well, that can be definitely kind of surreal. It's like I remember asking Namco if I could get a copy of the Katamari game for the Switch, and they sent me a physical copy. I was like, "Whoa!" Like, this is Namco. And then, of course, Sega sent the Genesis Mini. I was like, "Okay, that's cool." And then there was a little bit of controversy about that, and I found myself talking on the phone to them a couple of weeks later.
Really?
And then, it was about the whole Tower of Power thing. How they were just gifted it to some YouTubers, and it's like, okay, that's kind of weird. But they were, trying to test waters to see if it would sell, and apparently their test didn't come back saying that it would because they haven't sold it. And then, talking with people who actually make the games, like the creator of the Wonder Boy games contacted me after we made our Wonder Boy versus Adventure Island episode, like so long ago. That was like when our first 20 episodes or so. And he like wrote, and I was just like blown away. It's like, this guy made Wonder Boy. He made all the Wonder Boy games except for the Monster World one. And I was just so stoked. And, being able to talk to people like Yuzo Koshiro and other people, other musicians, it's just been incredible. It's just like, I never thought I would ever talk to these people. Even like I don't know how much I guess I can talk about this. A couple of years ago, another channel I'm friends with, My Life in Gaming, we went out to Illinois, and we were interviewing a lot of people who used to write for the Electronic Gaming Monthly magazine. And I used to read that magazine religiously. And talking to those people in real life, interviewing them, that was just nuts. That's something I never thought I would be able to do. And I wouldn't be able to do if GameSack wasn't a thing. So that's pretty awesome too.
Well, on the same token, you and GameSack, you guys, you're a celebrity yourself. Hey, you can say that, but look, for me, I'm a fan of your work. So it's surreal for me being able to have this conversation with you. So how does that feel? Like, have you had the experience where people have, told you like how big of a fan they are, or they love your work?
Yeah, that happens a lot, and I appreciate that. It's kind of weird getting recognized in public, which it hasn't happened in over a year because of COVID and everything. So a whole lot of public appearances going around. But I've been recognized at McDonald's, in airports, and other restaurants, and in the grocery store. It's crazy. It's like, you don't think that would happen. You're just going about your day. It's like, hey man, love the show. It's like, wait, what? Oh. So now with me wearing a mask everywhere I go, they can't recognize me. So
was it surreal, like going to like stuff like Too Many Games? Like,
yeah, kind of. Well, it's more surreal for me to like, kind of like you're experiencing right now. I was like meeting the other creators, like when I met Happy Console Gamer. It was weird because I'd never seen him in 3D before, and that was the first thing I thought of. It's like, wow, his face has depth. It's so weird. It's a weird first thing to think, but that's what I thought. And doing the panels, and people filling the room wanting to see you and talk to you, that is definitely weird. It's not something I don't think I'll ever be able to get used to. I think it's really cool, but it's just it's just crazy.
Get used to it.
Yeah.
Dude, if you ever came out here to Hawaii, you'd have a ton of fans. Folks out here love GameSack. So,
well, the closest I've ever got to Hawaii was playing the Test Drive Unlimited game, which takes place there. I don't know if you've played that. It's an open world driver. Yeah, and I created a character that just looks almost like me in the game. I played that game religiously for quite some time.
Awesome.
I'm sure the roads are exactly like it here in real life.
Well, I felt like a lot of the roads that they put in that game were kind of like an amalgamation of like here on Oahu and Honolulu and then Maui and Big Island. Because I remember when I was playing, I was like, okay, this looks familiar. I know what this is. And then, okay, that's not. It's like watching Hawaii 5-0 and it's like they're driving one area and then you're like, oh, wait, okay, that's a whole different island. Like, where? Last two questions I have for you. So this one is going back to Ease. I absolutely loved the episode that you did with Ease and covering the history of that franchise. And is it I say shocking a lot, but is it shocking? Yes, we're gonna stick with it. Is it shocking to see Ease is slowly but finally starting to catch mainstream attention after 30 years?
Right? Yeah, it makes me happy. I'm just happy that they're still making games, which is why I always make sure to buy them. I hear that East 9 is probably not, it's nowhere near as good as East 8. Still gonna buy it, still gonna play through it.
Yeah.
I just gotta support it, and I usually buy it on as many different consoles as I can. I just want to do my part to make sure these East games still get made to the future because they're just so fun. They always have great music. And even if they're not the best, most in-depth games in the world, they're still really fun to play through. And they've just got the fast-paced combat, yet, with this RPG kind of stuff tacked on, which is still really fun. And there's just not a whole lot like it anymore. And I just really like it, even though they tend to look very, very simple compared to other games on whatever platforms they appear on.
Yeah, definitely is. It's awesome that if you play it on PC, you can get almost all the titles. But that I'm glad to see that more people are hopping on it. I thought it was interesting when Ease 8 came to the Switch. A lot of Nintendo fans were like, "Oh, this is a Zelda knockoff," and I'm like, "What?" I'm like, you guys do know that these two series are roughly the same age,
right?
Give or take a couple months.
Yep.
But yeah, it's good to see that franchise is finally come around. And have you played the demo for 9?
No, I don't want to play the demo. I want to just get it and just go straight into it. I know I've heard people say the dungeon isn't overly impressive, but I don't care.
It has a weird 10-minute limit. So it's like after 10 minutes, it just kicks you out and reboots the demo. But
weird.
The gameplay, and I'm hoping this is just the demo itself, but it does feel slightly like a step down from 8, and 8 was great.
Oh, 8 was fantastic.
Yeah. So fingers crossed that one turns out really good.
Yeah, and hopefully, even if it's lackluster compared to 8, hopefully 10 will even be better, like better than 8. So just as long as they keep going, because they came out with East 4, those were really good, and then number 5 only came out in Super Famicom. It wasn't so hot, and then there was a long lull, and then they finally came out with number 6, and that one was really good, and then they just started kind of getting better and better.
Yeah. So last question I got is, so for you, when you do your hardware teardowns, what inspired you to do that? Like, are you I know you're a tech head, love tech. So What inspired you to incorporate that into GameSack?
Well, I basically, like you said, I'm a tech head. I just like talking about it. I've always been kind of into the numbers when it comes to the hardware. So for example, if the Genesis has 2 background layers, I want to mention it. I want people to know that. If it has 10 sound channels, I want people to know that. And I want them to know the correct information, because they'll get the Genesis's processor speed wrong a lot. And then, like other outlets who report on the text. And I don't know, I just think it's cool because I basically kind of make it into something that I'd want to watch. Like if I'm reading an article or watching a video on said console, what would I want to see covered? And that's kind of the angle I go at it. And that's basically how it ends up the way it is.
Okay. You do fantastic at it. Like I've always been curious, like the way you do, how it, you're taking apart the system and the parts are just moving. How much time does that take?
Not as much as you think. Granted, I've done it a lot, so I'm like really quick about it. But yeah, like if something coming apart, it'd take me about maybe 20-30 minutes to photograph it all, and then maybe another 10 once I bring all the photographs upstairs and compile it to the computer and put them together, and then just kind of zoom it around or whatever I need to do. So yeah, not too bad.
It's impressive. It's truly impressive. But yeah, is there anything you want to leave the audience with, your fans or any aspiring content creators with before we go?
Yes, please watch GameSack. Thank you.
All right. And I actually lied. I do have one final question for you.
Okay.
Did you have fun?
Yes, I did. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. And where can people find you again? For the 2 people in the back that don't know, but
www.youtube.com/GameSack. That should work. If that doesn't, then just search for GameSack, either all one word or 2 words on the Googles. You'll find it. Or GameSack.net, little web page I threw up. That'll take you to the YouTube channel, show you some extra goodies as well.
Awesome. And I'll leave links to everything in the description below for this podcast and more. So make sure you go and subscribe to GameSack on their YouTube channel.
And click that bell.
click the bell, ding the bell for notifications. That way you stay up to date on all the latest and greatest content that they put out. And even if YouTube doesn't tell you, there's the Facebook page, there's Twitter. So just make sure you're on it. Keep hitting that refresh button.
Yeah. Just go to the YouTube channel. Just refresh every video like once an hour, just to be sure.
Right?
I'd probably get banned if people started doing that.
So with that being said, you guys can catch this episode of the podcast along with many others. Video format, it's on youtube.com/Mikhail Kasanova, as well as on twitch.tv/Mikhail Kasanova. And also on audio format, we're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and we just got recently brought on to Amazon Music. Amazon reached out to us to get the show over there, so shout out to them for that being possible. And with that being said, this is Mikhail and Joe from GameSack. We are signing out. You guys, make sure you go subscribe, hit the notification bell on GameSack. Go do it right now. Go sub to the show right now. Like right now.
Wait, I'm looking. I am judging.
With that being said, you guys have a great one. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. I hope it was informative, engaging, and you enjoyed it. And if you did, make sure you go ahead and leave a rating and a review. It greatly helps out the podcast and helps the platforms that we're on go ahead and promote us more so that more people can check it out. And if you're wondering what all platforms we're on, aside from what you've listened to it on, we're available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, Pandora, Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. And if you want to support the podcast, then we've got Patreon, so patreon.com/Mikhail Kasanova, which allows us to continue doing what we're doing. If you're looking for this in video format, we're also available on twitch.tv/Mikhail Kasanova as well as youtube.com/Mikhail Kasanova. So with all that being said, I'll catch you on the next episode of Hawaii's #1 podcast and the #1 podcast in the Pacific, the Kasanova Podcast. You have a great day, and I'll see you on the next one.